dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary holy land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic, and we are not here with Matt this week as of yet. He is in the air right now. He is up in the air traveling, but he may join halfway through when we are in the middle of our conversation with none other than Raw Egg Nationalist, who is a returning guest who really needs no introduction, but I will nevertheless go ahead and introduce him. Raw Egg Nationalist is a fixture on our scene. He is the author of Raw Egg Nationalism, more recently, the Eggs Benedict option. He's the editor and publisher of Man's World. And most recently, he was featured in Tucker Carlson original documentary, The End of Men, and heralded as the premier, I think, bro scientist of our time, which, frankly is true. So, thank you for coming on, Rag. It's great to have you here.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure and a privilege, my friend.
Yeah. So perhaps, we just jump into what jumped out at me when reading the title, the Eggs Benedict option, is obviously it's a play on words, a play on the Benedict option by Rod Dreher. And so Rod Dreher in the Benedict option essentially suggests that the culture war for the moment is lost, and that the best thing that we can do is to remove ourselves and have a kind of parallel society. And this has received a lot of criticism, I think rightly so, because it's just it's very difficult to do that politically. They're essentially, they're not going to leave you alone. And there's arguments on either side, but I think it's going to be very difficult to politically divest oneself from our current society in any meaningful way. But the Eggs Benedict option of divesting your body from what you term soy globalism, that I think is something that is, perhaps very doable. And many of us are in some respects doing it right now. So what do you think about that? Is the Eggs Benedict option a viable future for us who want to preserve the purity of our bodies?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I chose the title mainly because I wanted to annoy Rod Dreher, because he had taken a swipe at me when all the Jack Murphy stuff came out. He took a swipe at me by trying to sort of link me to it, basically, because I'd been on Jack Murphy's podcast before that happened. And so he wrote an article about Jack Murphy called Queer as Volk, about kind of homoeroticism and fascism, and he just so happened to use an image from my appearance on Jack Murphy's podcast, a crap quality image as well. You could get a good quality image of Jack Murphy if you wanted, but he decided for some unknown reason to use a bad quality still from the YouTube video when I was on Jack Murphy's podcast. So I sort of I wanted to poke him back a little bit, and anyway, I came up with this idea.
Fair enough.
The Eggs Benedict option. Initially, it was going to be an essay, but then I thought, actually, you know what? That title is too good to be wasted on a 1,500 word essay, like that has to be a book. And I was thinking of writing a book, but I didn't actually have an argument. I only had the title, the Eggs Benedict option. Anyway, actually thinking then about the Benedict option and about what Rod Dreher is arguing, I started to think, well, what would an RWB be? What would a right wing bodybuilder version of the Benedict option look like, and what would it be in response to? Well, the Great Reset, of course, and this plan for us all to have no property, no privacy, and be happy, and eat plant-based food,
living in the pod,
eat plant-based food and bugs and all that kind of stuff. But yes, I was cognizant, of course, of the very obvious criticisms that you could make of Rod Dreher's work. I think it's wishful thinking in the extreme, and I think you only have to look at a group like the Amish, for instance. The Amish are often held up as a group of people who are living a trad lifestyle that is a total rejection of the modern world, and maybe we should be more like the Amish. But the truth is that the Amish are living on a reservation, or a series of reservations, right? And
absolutely.
And as we saw recently, there was a farmer, wasn't there, who was, I can't remember exactly what he was doing. There was an Amish farmer anyway who fell foul of the FDA, possibly for selling raw milk or something like that. Anyway, and they just absolutely invaded his farm, shut everything down. It made it to Tucker. It was on Tucker, I can remember. This wasn't that long ago, maybe a month or two ago. And that's the reality of spiritually divesting yourself from the current political regime, from the nation, but still within its territory. That's the problem: is that the government still monopolizes authority. The government still has a monopoly on violence, and you're still subject to the writ of their law. However much you might like to think that you're just sort of keeping to yourself and not bothering anybody, if they decide that actually you are bothering them, there's nothing you can do about it. So absolutely, and that's no different with this idea of the Benedict option. I mean, I think that it's historically, I think that it's misleading. It's misleading to compare conditions at the end of the Roman Empire with conditions today. I mean, for one thing, we haven't witnessed a collapse. That's one thing, right? Like, it's not.
They're still very much in power.
Yeah, exactly,
and will be even for the foreseeable future.
So it's not. It's not like retreating to fringe places after a political collapse, because then actually, you have a chance.
Yeah, it's not defensible, those areas. Yeah. So you can actually just do what you want.
Yeah.
I mean, it's akin to, in some ways, what jumps to my mind is the tribal areas in Afghanistan.
Sure.
Like, good luck. We tried. you can't impose your will on them, because it's just ungovernable, that area.
And you also,
but we don't have that in America, at least not yet.
And you also have things like, for instance, the monasteries in Ireland. The monasteries in Ireland were custodians of civilization, of the written word, of what constituted, let's say, like high technology in the Dark Ages. And so they had a mutualist sort of relationship with the people around them. The people around them, the ordinary people, wanted the monasteries to be there because, among other things, and they had knowledge of medical practices and all sorts of stuff like that. So it's not. I don't think it's a particularly good analogy, but
absolutely,
but not to labor that point. But the eggs. I mean, the thing about the Eggs Benedict option is, firstly, that it is a political solution as well. So I'm not just saying that people should sort of retreat into their bodies and just focus solely on ensuring that they have access to good food and do exercise and all that kind of stuff. That's definitely not what I'm saying. And I do think that what a movement for, well, what I'm advocating in the book basically is I'm advocating for a return to local food production and consumption. Basically the opposite of what the globalists want with the Great Reset, which is a global system of a global corporate system of food production which is totally out of the hands of ordinary people. Well, I'm arguing for the opposite, that we need to return to local systems of food production, which ordinary people are invested in and which allow them to produce and consume the kinds of foods that they actually want and need, rather than having, these sort of perverted corporate products foisted on them from on high.
Absolutely. Which is a return to sovereignty,
yes,
to local, like that is political power to grow your own food,
yes,
because then you're not reliant upon the food they serve you,
but
which is not good stuff.
Exactly.
Generally.
Exactly. No, it's very bad stuff indeed. But what that requires, I think, is very definitely a political movement, a kind of populism of some sort, because you have to take on the corporations firstly, because in America particularly, but in the rest of the world, but I think but especially so in America, then the system works in favor of the big corporate producers of food. And
absolutely,
there are all sorts of ridiculous regulations that make it very, very hard to be a small farmer. And there's a very famous essay by Joel Salatin, which became a collection of essays called "Everything I Want to Do is Illegal." but that's basically it. Like, he's a small farmer and he wants to do all of these things. He wants to sell raw milk. He wants to slaughter his own chickens. He wants to use his land in a particular way. He wants to have a sawmill. You can't do it. Like, there are all of these insane federal and local bylaws that prevent farmers from doing things that are just common sense. And actually, you would need a political movement to break the back of the corporations and to create a system that is much more favorable to small scale production, to small scale networks, food networks. But I look to places like Russia, which is probably an unpopular place to look at the moment, but
not on our side.
No, and but the sort of politics of it aside, then
I know what you mean.
The way that Russians produce food is very, very interesting, because what you've got a mixture of local small scale organic production by ordinary people in Russia with an industrial system as well. Whereas in America, really all you've got is the industrial system now. But in Russia, then a significant proportion of the food that ordinary Russians eat is produced by themselves on small plots of land in the countryside. So they either live in the country or they live in the city and have a plot outside the city that they travel to regularly. And something like 90% of all potatoes produced by value in Russia are produced by ordinary people. 87% of the fruit and berries, 50% of the milk, 50% of the meat.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. It's crazy.
Like, in the United States, that must be, minuscule. Like, probably like 0.5% of the potatoes are produced by small growers.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm pulling these figures out of the air.
But it's likely to be something like that.
Sure, it's like that.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so I'm drawing inspiration from that. And the basic message, the basic takeaway from looking at that system is, you can have a modern industrial nation. I know that Russia has demographic problems and economic problems and all that kind of stuff, but Russia is nevertheless an urban industrial nation, 150 million people, and a significant proportion.
One of the most populous on Earth.
And certainly the largest. But, an industrial nation, a modern industrial nation, can produce a significant amount of it can meet a significant amount of its food needs locally and organically. So that's really what I draw from it. But yes, I think that to go back to the question, yes, I don't think that we can. There's nowhere to run and hide. That's what I'd say. There's nowhere to run and hide. We have to stand and fight. And so the Benedict option, I think, is definitely out. I think we do need the eggs Benedict option instead.
Absolutely. And to be eggs Benedict option, the Russian, I think the term for it in the book was Russian household farming.
Household gardening.
Russian household gardening. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so I'm curious, how much land do you think one would need to be moderately self-sufficient in that regard, in this kind of conception of kind of being in an industrialized nation, but able to produce some of your own vegetables, some of your own meat. If you perhaps have a chicken coop, you perhaps have some small livestock. Like I would think you need a small plot of land. And I mean, obviously in the cities that would be tough, but America does have a lot of untapped countryside still, which is famously like they talk about, oh, this is flyover country. Well, like in flyover country, how many household farms could there be? If allowed
Yeah.
legally.
Well, you see, the thing is, here's an interesting fact. So the total amount of land under cultivation in Russia for household gardening is less than the total area of lawns in the US. Right. So
Wow.
there's already more or less enough land in private hands in the US to do,
To do this.
in the hands of private citizens to do, to do this kind of thing. It might not be equitably distributed, but nevertheless, I mean, that's an indication that that the means are there already. Having said that,
Yeah.
In America, then you do have a history of government land grants that go right back to the foundation, and indeed beyond. But certainly in the 19th century, then you have the Homestead Acts that give people,
Yes.
50 acres for a homestead on the frontier, that kind of stuff. You wouldn't need that much land at all. And my argument actually isn't that everybody should become a homesteader. So that's not what I'm saying in the book. So I'm not making an argument for homesteading, although, homestead if you want. Because that isn't what they do in Russia, for instance. So what we're talking about is we're talking about ordinary people who spend a certain amount of time each week on a little, usually quite small plot of land. I think the average size is less than an acre.
Okay.
Out in the countryside. So they either live in the countryside and it's their garden, and then they might also have a separate plot nearby. Or if they live in the city, then it's just outside the city and they travel there nights during the week or at the weekend. But I mean, what they do is they spend an average of 17 hours a week there during the growing season as well. And you have to remember that the growing season in Russia is only 4 months, which is much shorter than the growing season in the US. So that's another reason why this could definitely work in the US, because actually you get a lot more sunlight and you have a lot better climatic conditions than Russia, apart from maybe somewhere like
100%.
Apart from somewhere like Alaska,
like
or some of the kind of high mountain areas of the States. But yeah, you don't need a huge amount of land. This is because this is an intensive form of agriculture on a small scale. You don't need a great amount of land, and it's quite amazing just how much produce these ordinary Russian people are able to produce with the sweat of their brow and without machinery or anything like that. They use all sorts of tried and tested ancient techniques for cultivation that we've sort of forgotten about, but that would be very easy to replicate. So it's it's not that the government would have to put aside huge tracts of lands to give 300 million people a homestead or anything like that. That's not my argument. My argument is just that people could, with a little bit of land each, or even if you put aside communal areas outside cities like allotments, you could allow, and if you allowed people to produce fruit and veg and keep animals in their gardens, because there are a lot of local bylaws in the US that prevent.
Oh, I'm sure.
Prevent you from, not in every state, but some states and counties. Then there are bylaws where you can't have a vegetable bed in your garden, which is insane. But anyway, it wouldn't take much for ordinary people to have a much greater hand in producing the food that they eat, and that would be a good thing. And then, of course, the other part of the argument is that what we need reform of the industrial system as well. And so I talk about regenerative farming, about people like Joel Salatin, people who do farming on a much larger scale, but still a smaller scale than the huge industrial farms that dominate the US market. So again, that's where the sort of political aspect comes in, where you're talking about breaking the back of corporations and encouraging small farmers to take their place, basically.
Yeah, no, I think in this instance, to draw it back to the raw egg nationalism of it all, eggs are, as you say, a superfood. And one of the reasons why is that chickens are very easy to cultivate, right? Relatively
Yeah.
speaking, like you can have a small garden and have a chicken coop. You cannot have a small garden and have like a herd of cattle. That's
No.
not going to really work. But like, yeah, you could have a couple of
Mm.
chickens, and they produce eggs, produce meat. They're relatively easy to tend. And this is me kind of like speaking off the cuff. I'm not an expert in this,
No,
but
it's true.
it
It's true.
does seem to be that way.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong.
No, it's true. No, it's true. Chickens are great, and you can keep. I mean, there's that very very funny 4chan green text about the indoor chicken farmer. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where there's this man. I think he's in Eastern Europe, and he's keeping chickens in his flat in the city, and he's got this like
Oh.
coop with blankets over it, and it's so funny. But yeah, you don't.
Not the cleanest animals,
No,
but
I wouldn't recommend doing that. But you can, yes, on a small plot of land, you can definitely keep a few chickens. And if you have something like an acre, or even slightly less than an acre, then you could definitely have a milk cow, goats, and you could certainly have a pig or two as well. Because the thing is, you can feed pigs food waste, among other things. Chickens likewise chickens are omnivores. Chickens will eat meat, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the things that the Amish, to go back to the Amish, that's one of the things that the Amish do. They feed their chickens meat scraps from their farms, and that's why their chickens and their eggs are so good. Because chickens are omnivores, and if you've actually maybe you've seen it, maybe you haven't. A chicken will eat a mouse. If a chicken sees a mouse, a chicken will eat a mouse. And there was a video that was.
Oh, I believe it.
Yeah, there was a video on Twitter of a chicken stealing a mouse from a cat on a farm. So
yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely you can definitely do a lot with a small amount of land, and that does include keeping livestock. But yes, you do have to cut your cloth according to your means. You're not going to have a dairy herd on a quarter acre.
Yeah. And but you can control then what they eat, of course.
Exactly.
And so you can feed them. Like one of the biggest problems with factory farming, beyond the cruelty, beyond the obvious ethical concerns, I would say, are the health of the animals, and thus the health of us.
Yeah.
You're eating sickly animals who have been fed the worst type of stuff. And if you own your own animals, you can, feed them. I mean, it doesn't take a lot, right? Like, you just don't feed them kind of like, the whatever meal or, churned up feed they feed on these factory farms.
Yeah.
And you have a healthier animal, and thus a healthier you.
Yeah. I mean, I've said this more than once. You are what you eats. So, if you're eating animals that have been fed substandard fodder, then the nutrition is going to be less than you'd get from an animal that have been fed what it should be eating. And there are all sorts of ways that you can. I mean, if you wanted, you could go into insect farming, and you could actually produce things like mealworms quite easily, so that you can supplement your chicken's diet. I mean, chickens really should be scratching around in the dirt looking for insects.
True, yeah. And I mean, that's what they eat.
Yeah, and small creatures. But yes, you can supplement their diet by breeding mealworms and other insects if you want. I mean, that's really, chicken should be eating insects. We on the other hand should not.
We should not. If hopefully not. I mean, although it's funny, right? About like, for instance, I was having shrimp last night, and it's like, well, some of the sea creatures we eat are, akin to insects, I suppose.
Sure,
But
sure.
regardless, um, I guess moving on to something else we talked about before the episode, and I'll jump into it now. The magazine revolution, of which I think Man's World is at the forefront, at the leader,
Thank you.
frankly. Like yeah, you have been putting out this magazine for a while now, and the annual that you put out last year is striking. It's great. I have it on my coffee table. My dad was browsing through it, and he's just like, my dad is, I'm 36, so he's in his 70s. He's not like very online, but he's just looking through it, and he's just like, oh, this is really cool. And it's been a while since men have picked up magazines and been like, oh, this is something that's for me. Like, as opposed to like, you pick up Esquire and it's like, how to talk to your trans son or something. And it's like, well, this is not for me. But no, Man's World has, like, I mean, fiction, of course, but beyond that, health science, beyond that, political analysis, and it's glossy, at least the annual. It looks, it has all of this great artwork, these ads. Some of them are spoof ads, which are funny. It's great. It's just like everyone should buy it. And so Man's World, obviously, you're producing that. To give a shout out to I Am Magazine from I Am 1776. Those guys put out a great product. Cars and Women, our friend Stained Haynes, he puts that out. Some great writing in there. So we have a bit of a revolution going on in terms of physical magazines coming out. And crucially, you are now producing the digest, which will be, I think, available certainly more frequently than annually. And yeah, so we have these physical products that are available to, have in our homes. And my contention there, thinking about it, like, not only is it great to have, but also it helps to, as always, it helps to legitimize whatever you are when you exist in the real world. So when someone has, like I just said, like on my coffee table, my dad picks it up. It's like, well, this isn't something that you just do on the internet. This is like, it's a book on your desk, on your coffee table. And it's akin to, like, last week, I read an excerpt from my novel Nutcracker at a reading that was in New York City. And, people are there listening. And, other people are reading. It was sponsored by Terror House Press, my publisher. And they're all, listening to these, stories by myself and other people. And they're in the real world, meeting each other. And I think this is the next step forward, is going into meat space, as they say, with publications and in life meetings. And indeed, I mean, we'll talk about this more, but certainly with documentaries like The End of Men on Tucker Carlson Originals, of which you are featured and heralded as one of the thought leaders of our culture.
Yeah, it's no, I totally agree. I do think that it's important to break out of, as much fun as it is on Twitter, and I do like it on Twitter, and I
Oh
owe my
yeah, I love
I owe
Twitter.
my success to, in very large measure, to Twitter and to the people that I've met on Twitter.
Oh, me too.
but
Yeah.
I think that, yes, I think that having these physical artifacts, these products, is a very, very important and very, very positive step in the right direction. I mean, one of the ways that I like to think about the annual is as a kind of message from the future. It's like, this is what this is what this is how things could be. This is what things could look like if we were in control of the culture. Like, we could have books like this, magazines like this, that actually say the things that we want we want to be said, that speak to us directly. This is what culture could look like if we were in control. So it's like
Absolutely.
it's like a promise. It's like this is what we could attain. Because I can't at the moment. I logistically I still haven't quite cracked the problem of how I would distribute the magazine regularly. It's a big thing for one person to. I don't have anyone else helping me at the moment,
Yeah.
so it's a big thing, and there are all sorts of logistical problems and maybe some legal problems too. So the so the annual is my way of sort of as well. Of course, I'm just producing a nice product that people want to read, but I do think that there's also something deeper. There's something more meaningful, symbolic about the production of this thing. It's like, look, this is if we all got our act together, if we all pulled together and supported one another and really sort of pushed in the same direction, then this could be, instead of being a one-off, then this could just be, the culture could be like this, rather than just a rare artifact once a year. It could be, this could be us in control of the culture. And yeah, it's very, very heartening that other people are also producing stuff. It's all to the good. It's all to the good. Even if we disagree on certain things, I think it's all to the good, really, that we're starting to see this real outpouring of creativity in the real world.
Absolutely. With regard to the digest specifically, is the plan there to have a physical? Because I have the last digest. Yeah. It's great. Yeah. It is the plan for that to come out somewhat regularly,
every issue. So there'll be after issue 9 comes out, then there'll be a digest, and it'll have eight to 10, a selection of 8 to 10 pieces from issue 9 in black and white, in that sort of digest, slightly retro form, within the constraints of the Amazon print on demand system. So there are things you can't do on that you could do with with another printing service. Like you can't have images running across pages within the magazine or within the publication, and there are other things like that. You can't adjust the margins, you can't go up to the margins or anything like that, or beyond the margins rather. So I mean, I'm working within the limitations of the form, but again, it's not expensive. It's $10 for the digest, and it's a physical product you can have that you can show to people, and also it's a way of supporting what I'm doing as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's just like, it's so great to have it in your hands, to have something that you can actually like last night I was reading it and getting ready for our episode, reading your essay, which we'll get to. And it's great to have something that, like, I'm not really a screen guy. I I'm on the screen enough at work.
Yeah.
And so when I'm like, want to read something for pleasure, it's like, it's so great to actually have something in your hands.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, yes, it's the ideal. Listen, I mean, if I could have published the magazine in hard copy form from the start, I would have. Yeah. But the thing is, when I started, then I just thought, oh, this is just going to be like a glorious one-off. This will be funny, and people will think, oh, this is great. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could have our own magazine that wasn't paused and didn't.
I mean, it's funny that the culture has changed so much, because I remember I grew up in I'm 36. I grew up in the 90s. Matt is joining us now.
Fantastic.
So very cool to have Matt on board. Hello, Matt.
Hey, how's it going? Can you guys hear me okay?
We can hear you.
It's good to have you here.
Yeah,
we hear you.
I'm reporting live from the Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas. So a bit of a layover here. But great.
Back.
Well, I won't thank you. I'm not sure if this will be my most based podcast ever, since I'm basically in public, but nevertheless, I'm glad to be able to join.
Don't access to the airport.
Yeah, right. So I don't want to disrupt the conversation too much. So you guys get back into what you were talking about, and I'll hop in when I can.
Cool. Okay, so we were talking about how in the 90s, men's magazines like Esquire or whatever, I would read them as a teen,
Me too.
as a even preteen. And it was actually stuff that was interesting. It was a men's magazine. It was for men. It did talk about stuff that, was pertinent to our lives. And that's just gone now. Like the stuff that, if you pick up Esquire today, it's like I was telling Raeg, earlier, it's like how to talk to your lesbian wife. And it's not like or yeah, it's not really pertinent, hopefully not pertinent to most men's lives. And so like it's so great to have something like Man's World and these other magazines that are coming out. We've said them earlier. I Am Magazine, Cars and Women, Passage, of course, Passage. And yeah, it's great to actually have stuff that's, again, for us. And, frankly, it's kind of cool that it's underground. It's like you feel like you're a part of a secret club. And I guess kind of we are.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, it's definitely, I do think that the edginess of it and the sort of in-group aspect of it, I think, is something actually that you see prominent conservative commentators kind of aspiring to. And I think they're maybe jealous is the wrong word, but they definitely kind of I think they definitely kind of would like to be on board. But of course, yes, I mean, some of that, as this maybe goes a bit more mainstream, if indeed it does, will, some of that mystique will be lost. But I do think, nevertheless, that simply the mere fact that we are producing content like this ensures that it will seem fresh and edgy and very different from anything else on the market at the moment. Certainly very different from any of the traditional men's magazines, or what's left of them, including obviously Playboy, which is one of my main inspirations. The classic Playboys, but even Playboy up to about sort of 2010, 2012. I've got some copies of Playboy here from, I think, even as late as 2014 that weren't not bad at all. And you still got good written content, and it's not in any obvious sense paused, but I mean, Playboy now is just a laughing stock. I mean,
yeah,
Hugh Hefner.
Like I can't even imagine what like the centerfolds look like now.
Well, they had a
social justice centerfolds.
Well, they had a transgender model on the cover recently.
Oh my God!
Yeah, they did. So they've gone there. They've gone. Yeah, it's crazy.
I can't imagine that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's. Oh, not for men. I mean, well, I guess for some men.
I think they had. Didn't they have? I think they had Lizzo in it as well. I think Lizzo was like did a.
That sounds right.
I think so. But don't. If she hasn't, then she will. I'm sure she will, and that will just be the next thing that will send Hugh Hefner spinning even faster in his grave.
My principal memory of Playboy, early, teenager, preteen, or like 13, and I found one, and I think it was the Spice Girls, and it was, I think, Ginger Spice.
Funny.
And that was just like, like, wow. I was, yeah. It like I think Playboy inducted a lot of men into masculinity and sexuality.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, like, if this is inducting men into sexuality, it's doing a very deviant job of, of that.
It's an interesting point. I think it speaks both to. Oh, I think am I on mute? No, I'm not. Okay, good.
No, we hear you.
I'm intermittently going on mute when children are passing by and things like that, because I've definitely never done a podcast like this. But I just wanted to say, it's absolutely, both what you're saying in terms of, the finding your dad's Playboys or whatever being a sort of rite of passage, both speaks to the power that it once had and also why it's so deviant now. If it's bringing a very different social message now, but it's still, probably not, because I don't think younger teenage dudes are going to be interested, but nevertheless, the intention would almost be to sort of hijack, into the young mind,
bisexuality, really.
Essentially, yeah. But I did also want to kind of say it's amazing with men's magazines and kind of the entertainment industry generally. I mean, these were certain elements of them, maybe we'd always had criticisms of, definitely in the case of the more, the broader Hollywood and entertainment industry. But it's these things used to have elements of vitality to them that we can see as virtuous sort of in retrospect. But what they are now, it's almost like imagine, in my head, I'm imagining like a metaphor of like an old mall or something where every store has been repurposed, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in that metaphor, but you get what I mean. It's like the simulacra of what once was. It's like almost like why do people even continue to make movies? Why do people even bother trying to make men's magazines? Just basically to leech off of the power that was once in these cultural institutions, but instead to bring the sort of GAE, whatever you want to call it, ideology now.
Trojan horse, really.
Exactly.
I think I mean, it's strange. I don't know who reads Playboy anymore. I really don't know who the readership of Playboy is. But I think that taking over these cultural institutions, if you could call Playboy that, I suppose you could, taking over and subverting these cultural institutions is actually important. I think the actual act of doing that is important. Being seen to be in control of these,
absolutely.
What was formerly a bastion of, let's say, masculine culture, for that to be so totally subverted is a symbolic victory for them. It shows, it's a demonstration, and so I think that's why it matters so much. That's why there was always going to be a transgender model on the front of Playboy. That just had it had to happen.
People salute his horse.
Exactly. It is exactly that.
It's iconoclasm. It's tearing down monuments.
It is. That's
and
a good
replacing
way
it with their own.
True.
Which obviously was something that happened in 2020 and continues to happen, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, the iconoclasm thing is always interesting because you have like the very concrete example of tearing down statues, but then it's actually much more interesting to look at the more metaphorical or like less literal ways it happens with institutions like men's magazines and what have you. And I noticed I don't know, I'm sure we're going to be talking about the End of Men documentary. I don't know.
That was actually my next topic, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't want to.
No, it's a great segue.
But I noticed that even in that, it's a great documentary. Let me say that first and foremost. But in the sections where they're kind of talking about those decline of the West type topics, they lean into that image of iconoclasm, which isn't even directly related to the physical health topic that most of the documentary is about. But nevertheless, it's always, that image is never far from the surface because it takes us far in kind of realizing what is going on, which is this tearing down process.
Yeah, the End of Men is, I mean, the reaction to the End of Men was hilarious, I thought, and I've written, I wrote about that for American Mind. I wrote about the reaction to the trailer, about the fact that the various critics in the mainstream media and on Twitter, could only say, "Oh, this is so gay, this is so homoerotic. Tucker's a closet homosexual. Tucker, is just airing his fantasies for us all to see, and all that kind of stuff." Trying to dismiss it on those terms, and of course that is a common slur that is used to deter men from associating with one another, from cultivating real friendship and pursuing higher goals.
Absolutely.
And that's something that I talk about in the article, because they are afraid of men who have broken
together.
Yeah, broken free from the matrix, who aren't just passive consumers, but are actually creators, producers of culture and values. That's something that absolutely terrifies them, and that's something that runs through all of the responses to the Tucker documentary, and also I think more broadly to my work and the work of people, someone like Bronze Age Pervert and other work on masculinity and vitality and vitalism, all that kind of stuff. It's definitely something that scares them, and for good reason, because it would totally overturn the world as they want it to be.
I actually have like a sort of political question about that in a second, but I do think to speak on the reaction first, I think that I was glad to see the reaction was interesting enough and disgusting enough in certain ways from the sort of mainstream media that Tucker actually incorporated it into the
Yeah.
documentary at the end, which I thought was worthwhile because that's is as very much as interesting as a lot of the other stuff in the documentary was that reaction. So I was glad to see that. But I guess my question is like I was thinking about this while watching it. You have JFK is really the only political figure cited in the documentary, and a speech he gave about getting America's youth in shape, essentially, which is indeed very inspiring. Is the main sort of political content, or the only time like a really political figure, unless you count Robert F. Kennedy as such, is cited. And it got me thinking, because obviously JFK was a Democrat. Obviously, that was a different party at the time. The point isn't really, whether JFK was on the right side of this side of the other thing, but it got me thinking that evidently here was a president who people don't necessarily, it's not Theodore Roosevelt. People don't necessarily see JFK as like one of our guys per se, but just as a general American president who cared about his country. He cared about the health of the youth, and that his motivations there, I'm sure, were very pure and had to do with strengthening the nation for people's good, for the good of the nation. So I wonder if you have thoughts, that I'm sure you do, on what's changed that now our government doesn't obviously doesn't want that, for reasons that are talked about in the documentary. I guess just I'm talking in circles here, being in the airport a little bit, but just especially because JFK is not like this seen as this base figure. He was just a normal American president.
Sure.
So it's not even like a right wing versus left wing thing. It's like what has changed that a normal president would have vouched for these things, and now it's the president won't vouch for that, or maybe even supports the opposite.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I don't know. I don't know enough about American political history and the speeches and policies of presidents to know exactly whether anybody else has talked about the subject in the way that Kennedy did, or even touched on the subject at all. Obviously, various presidents since Kennedy have talked about obesity and health problems and stuff like that. But I don't know that any president has ever couched it, certainly since Kennedy, in the way that Kennedy was couching it in that speech, as being, it's not just, oh, people are too fat and it's costing the government money, and it's costing employers money, healthcare insurance and all that kind of stuff, and it makes our it lowers our GDP or something like that. A kind of very, very kind of base sort of economic interpretation of everything that seems to win out now. Mm-hmm. But actually, he was making a much deeper argument about the nation as an entity, about the health of the nation as an entity, about its purpose and strength and its future. And no, I don't know that anybody's spoken like that, and I don't know. Obviously, well, look at the reaction to the documentary. So, it's apparently, it's basically fascism. That has been the main response, is that. Yeah. What was it? One phrase was hyper militant men. That's what Tucker's promoting, right? It's hyper militant men. So I think there's definitely been a change in the sort of political climate where, look, that was the 60s, right? The Second World War wasn't a long way away then, and yet Kennedy's flirting with fascism by talking about the health of the nation and sort of regimented physical discipline and getting people to fall in line and do physical exercise regularly and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know exactly what has changed, but something definitely has changed in the political culture. Whether it's also whether it's also got anything to do with the entrenchment or the further entrenchment of these big corporations that feed us muck and medicate us, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, quite possibly it is to do with that. Maybe it's that.
Oh, I
It's
expect to a considerable degree.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think I know I asked a question knowing damn well that I was asking a question with a very complicated answer, but it is interesting to highlight. I guess, just partially that, again, it's JFK. It's not,
Yeah.
who pick your poison. But yeah, where are you say down? Sorry.
it's striking that as recently, I mean, not very recent, but as recently as the 1960s, JFK, he essentially in the documentary and in our political history was saying something to the effect of the health of our young men is consonant with the health of the nation. And something like that was something that was being said by JFK, who was one of the architects of the Civil Rights Act, frankly.
Right.
And I mean, like, you couldn't find really a more progressive guy. I mean, maybe not in his personal life, but in his political life than JFK. And this was a guy who, and when it came to physical fitness, would say something like that. And it's such a kind of indictment of our culture that today the idea of like the health of a nation is tied to the health of its young men and their vitality is seen as something pernicious or bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
And
absolutely.
that's really, if that doesn't give people pause, like all of this outroar against the end of men, the video, the documentary, if that is kind of like explained to them, well, okay, but you're essentially disagreeing with JFK. Like this is, theoretically their idol. JFK is, he's the great, hero of the progressive movement in some respects.
Well, it's
And
interesting, that although there was a very, very vehement reaction, a very, very violent reaction to the trailer, it's quite noticeable that actually since the documentary dropped, and there was a sort of how long was it? It was at least 5 months between the trailer and the documentary dropping. There's actually been a very, very muted reaction from the mainstream media to the documentary itself. So
okay.
there were dozens of hit pieces about the trailer, and then there's been very, very little reaction to the documentary from the left. I think in part because the actual content of the documentary is much deeper than they want to acknowledge, than they don't want to engage with it. And yes, I think now that you've brought up the JFK thing, I think it is partly that too. It's like, look, you've got a Democrat politician, the bright young hope of the nation, changing America. And yet he's also saying these things that you would like people to believe are fascistic.
Yeah,
and that
exactly.
I think they would rather just prefer that the documentary didn't happen. That's what I think they're actually doing. I think they're actually trying to starve it of oxygen, basically. Because there was a lot of publicity about the trailer. I mean, Stephen Colbert was talking about it. Joy Behar, all of these people, the Young Turks. And now there's been absolutely nothing like that for the actual documentary itself.
Right.
Because
well, that
they're
leads to another
afraid.
point. Yeah. No, they're absolutely afraid, and it's a point I definitely wanted to make. I think I said this last time you were on the podcast. Relating to your work, Ryan, but the documentary as a whole. I mean, there's no better thing to show the uninitiated, the normie, than a documentary like this, because again, it doesn't foreground political issues as such. All these things that are apparently very frightening to people, with Trump and everything, but rather it's about physical health, and it makes arguments against things like Monsanto and these other corporations that no one in their right mind really likes, other than people who are lining their pocketbook, on their dime. So this is it's not propaganda, but if it's extremely effective at winning, potentially curious minds over, and I think that's one of the reasons why you're not going to see people engage with it, because that trailer. So I don't know if this was by design, but obviously the trailer did a great job of putting this on a lot of people's radar. Because I mean, I'm not gonna echo the MSM commentators, but obviously homoerotic is not the word I would use, but it's striking. It's visually, it's a vision of masculinity, no doubt, and involving the sort of joke with the, well, not joke, but treated for a little bit of humor, I think, with the ball tanning thing. It did a good job of kind of getting eyeballs on it. But in the actual documentary, it's like you get the trailer, but then you get a lot of in-depth stuff from a variety of voices, not all of which are political or associated with any right-wing conspiracies or anything.
Well, the interesting thing is, so one of the ways they've tried to dismiss the documentary is by saying that Tucker is using pseudoscience, that it's that all he cares about is young white men rather than any other male demographic. And there was a ridiculous, I think it was a tweet, or might even have been a hit piece type article, where they were saying, oh, there's one person of color features in The End of Men, and they're in the documentary for 0.26 seconds. They've actually taken a stopwatch to see just exactly how long this one person was in the documentary. But just this week, a new study has come out, which a big scientific study out of Israel has just come out, and it shows that all of the changes that we've witnessed in the Western world in terms of fertility and testosterone levels, sperm counts, are being mirrored outside the Western world in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. So, this is a global problem, and that puts a very different slant on it. It puts a very different slant on the criticism as well, because these people are trying to say that it's these MSM commentators are trying to say this is Tucker's fever dream about the decline of white male potency in America. That's what they're trying to say that it is, and yet here we have some very, very compelling further evidence that actually what's going on is this is a global problem. So I think that the critics are in a tight spot. They just don't want to engage with it. And so they're not.
Yeah, no, you bring up a good point with that. So I think it ties also into part of what I was saying with this being a good, this kind of content being good. This kind of issue with health being a good one to focus on, because it really does transcend a lot of the hot button things, because it doesn't reduce to just some race thing or something. No. As you said, it really becomes a problem that everyone, even even some people who are more aligned with these elements of the culture that we don't like, nevertheless, like you don't want to die young. Like it just so directly speaks to people, where they are and in a place that they may need to improve.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. I do think. I mean, I come in for criticism, and have come in for some criticism since I actually appeared, because I was on Tucker Carlson Tonight, or Tonight with Tucker Carlson.
Right.
I was interviewed on that for 5 minutes, which was utterly surreal. But
definitely, no, it's just a little off topic. I Dan step away for a second so we can get back to his outline when he comes back. But no, it's amazing that Tucker did this, obviously. And you mentioned earlier how you get with Man's World and all these things. It's evident that people like him are again not necessarily the best ones aren't necessarily jealous of it, but they're seeking ways to channel it more effectively. And he seems like definitely someone who's doing that.
Yeah. He's definitely someone who I think is on board, and I think he's trying to harness the energy, I think, in the right way. Because you see other people who are kind of parasitic on it, and they don't really do anything other than steal talking points and memes, without giving them, cheapen them, without giving any real credit. So yeah, I mean, Tucker is doing a great job, because he's treading a very fine line.
He is, and he's doing a good job of it. I'm very excited to see, him continue. He does, these, obviously he had you on his main program, but he also, I'm not even sure what this is called, but he does like some kind of video podcasting where he had Yarvin and he had our friend Catherine Dion, who's like even, she's got a good audience, but like she's smaller than Yarvin and smaller than yourself. And I only say that to illustrate that he's really kind of digging in deeper,
yeah, for sure,
to this corner of things. And as you said, he's not someone taking the ideas, 2 years after people originally made them. He's actually engaging with, a vital corner of the internet. So there's, maybe we'll talk a little. I know that you're not as averse in necessarily some of the American political landscape, so I don't know how much we'll talk about that. There's some sort of black pill's too strong a word, but there's some disappointment with the recent, midterms and what have you. But like there's still a lot of, I think, white pills in what people like Tucker are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, I was just saying that I did come in for a bit of criticism after I appeared on Tucker Carlson, because people were saying, people who hadn't really taken notice of me before, people on the right were saying, "Oh, this is just a distraction from this particular issue, which is the big issue of our time." Or this is the most pertinent issue for the right today, blah blah blah. And I mean, the thing that first of all, it's definitely not a distraction. And these kind of people who just, I don't know, there's a certain kind of person who just wants everybody just to Fed post the whole time, and
absolutely.
And it's I'm like, okay, well, how far have you got constantly talking about that one issue that you're afraid, that you're ashamed to say that I won't talk about? It's like you've not got very far at all. In fact, what you've done is you've ended up maneuvering yourself into a position where actually you don't have any way out, and nobody takes you particularly seriously. It's like, the health issue is definitely is a like with Bronze Age mindset, with Bronze Age pervert, then it's something that has an intuitive appeal, that you really can capture people's imagination, and also appeal to their basic instincts and their kind of basic desires and wants.
I think it goes back to what we said at the beginning, the Benedict option versus the eggs Benedict option. And, there is a certain class of us online who prefer a sort of based Benedict option.
Yeah, for sure.
Where you have your own silo and you say things that, everyone who is like in the normie world is going to be like, what now? This is not going to work. You're crazy. And then they, resent you for reaching out on programs like Tucker. But I mean, I think the more forward thinking of us understand that you do need to be in the arena. You do need to be fighting for your beliefs. And there's no better venue to do that than on Tucker. He's like, if anyone in the media is our guy, that it's him.
Yeah, I mean, how anybody could turn my appearing on Tucker into a cause for anything other than happiness is just beyond me. I was quite taken back actually by the fact that actually some people really did react very badly to it.
I mean, we have a lot of Spurgs out there. So.
Yeah, we do. We have people, and I don't even want to drag them because I think some of them, have their own issues. But like, there's people who are just allergic to any kind of success.
Yeah, for sure.
Like that. Maybe they've seen it happen before, and they know that like sometimes the message gets perverted or softened in some kind of way. But that's, again, to reiterate, that's not at all what's going on with you.
No,
or Tucker
but also
or anything like that.
In many respects, then the message will have to be softened to be right. That's not necessarily a bad thing at all for the message to be softened. Yeah. It's
softened, not subverted.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a good distinction. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's certainly too many people out there who are black-pilled and, want everyone else to be. And I think that's kind of a good segue to your essay in the most recent digest in Man's World Digest, Tilting at Black Pills. And so you were responding to Alex Perez, in some respects, responding to Alex Perez's essay in I Am Magazine, where Perez seemed to deride the writers on the right, our kind of emerging class of frog fiction writers, shall we say, as being too black pilled. But he wasn't really like that. He didn't explain exactly what he meant, and I think you did raise a very good distinction, which is like, yes, of course, young men writing today will be writing about topics that are kind of nihilistic because that's the landscape that they live in. But that doesn't mean it has necessarily a nihilistic message.
No.
In fact, as you say with BAM, with Bat Book, like it's frankly quite the opposite.
Yes, that's not a black pill text. I found that bizarre that was highlighted as a black pill text. I'm like, what
makes you wonder if he actually read it?
Yeah, true,
for sure.
True.
but the thing is as well, I mean, to say that Michel Houellebecq is just a black pilled writer, I mean, his writing is uniformly dark. I'm not going to dispute that. But when I use the example of his novel Platform, his second novel, as to say, well, actually, yeah, maybe superficially this is sort of like a black pill novel, and what you've got is, you've got the end of history and this man who just meets a woman, and they descend into kind of sexual hedonism, and then they end up in Southeast Asia, in Thailand, pursuing this kind of meaningless hedonistic lifestyle, and maybe that's all we can hope for. And then all of a sudden these jihadis pull up on the beach on jet skis and kill everybody, and that's in a strange way, that is a hopeful message, right? And that's what I say in the piece, is that is like,
true.
Here is history. We thought it was the end of history. It's just liberalism and individualism, no meta narrative, just hedonism, whatever, do what thou wilt. And then suddenly you have the re-emergence of history. Suddenly you have the emergence of a narrative, of a grand narrative, the re-emergence of possibilities. You could spend your life, having sex on the beach in Thailand, or you could end up being blown up by a jet ski riding jihadi out of nowhere. So it's like that there's no way that is a simple black pill text. I mean, some other novels of Houellebecq's are pretty black pilling in certain respects.
Yeah, what his first whatever, perhaps is, but even there, it's like, I mean, the mere fact that his novels are so funny and moving, intermittently, that's even if textually it's black pilling, it's I don't know if you guys can hear this airport announcement in the background here, but can you? I don't know.
We can, but I mean, I'm sure you'll edit it.
Little production value. Anyway, not to make too meta of a point, but the books are so good that their existence is not a black pill. It's the opposite. It shows that there's a triumph of art, that can be edifying to the soul, even in the face of very bad social reality. So if that's one level on which it's not black pill, and then the other level is what you mentioned, which is that there's more to it highlighted. I think Houellebecq's books are about a declining civilization, no doubt. I mean, I don't think you have to deny decline of civilization or not to be black pilled, but his work shows, just as Bat Book and the work that you do as well shows different ways out of it. I think that Houellebecq's, in a slightly more understated and less obviously instructive way, does as well, and it's just that's the stuff you have to read for.
I mean, one of the things that I also found kind of interesting and or baffling rather about that essay was the way that he sort of tried to dismiss the content of Bronze Age mindset and just say that actually what the book is about the style. First of all, as if you can separate style and content in an easy way. I mean, I don't think you ever really can, and I don't think you can with Bronze Age mindset. But it was just a funny thing to sort of try to reduce Bronze Age mindset to BAP speak, to his particular lingo, that sort of the slang that he's developed. I just thought, God, I mean, what's that people find that, people find that funny, and you see a lot of people on Twitter using BAP speak, and it's definitely caught on. It's definitely become a meme, and it's funny, especially when he does it, because he does it very well. But that is not the primary reason why people are reading Bronze Age Mindset. And
no,
if you
definitely
if you
not.
actually rewrote Bronze Age Mindset in a more sober tone, if you kind of cut the BAP speak, the ideas would still, although the ideas would maybe have less immediate force, they wouldn't have the kind of comic punch and that they do now. Nevertheless, the ideas would still, I think, have a very, very powerful impact. And it is the ideas. It is the ideas about the bug man and the bug world, and the potential for a kind of reemergence of the sea peoples and all this kind of stuff. The potential to move out of totally owned space onto some new horizon, where actually you can fulfill your inborn desire as a man, maybe to exercise and develop your powers. That's the message. And that's what people. But I mean, I don't know that Bronze Age Mindset is necessarily. I mean, it could be literary inspiration for fiction writers, but I don't know why that was even really sort of chosen as the subject of an essay about fiction
literature.
fiction writing on the right, because I think that fiction writing on the right, I don't know that it's hugely influenced by Bronze Age Mindset.
I think he picked it just because it's a very successful right-wing self-published book, and kind of like treated it like, well, that's like delicious tacos. That's but it's not, of course.
Well, I think almost in a sense, what he's actually trying to say is, that Bronze Age Pervert doesn't believe any of the things he's written. It's just fiction, right? He's a character. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true at all. In fact, I know it's not true. Yeah, I know it's not true.
Yeah.
You can't.
No, I mean, to be charitable to Alex there, I think like maybe what he was getting at was that in right-wing fiction, because his beat is literature, he's not a philosopher, he's a fiction writer, that a lot of right-wing literature is essentially people in our sphere trying to write like Welbeck or trying to write like Zero HP. And I think there is some credence to that. Like, we both like positive and negative, like you should have your influences. You like, people who want to write the type of stories that Zero HP writes, kind of like, philosophical sci-fi. The people who want to write the type of kind of, comedic on-way type stories that Welbeck writes, like, have at it. And like, you should have your mentors. You should, follow them. But like, that's not the only way to write fiction. Like, there are other models. There are other, people you could follow. And so to be charitable to Alex here, I would say that he maybe is suggesting that there are, that the right-wing fiction scene is nascent and growing, and that there are other, styles and, whatever that can be explored.
I mean, one of the things I was just say, one of the things that I would dispute is whether or not there needs to be a kind of unified group, whether we need to have dissident right fiction as a group, and you've got a group of people and they're all working towards the same kind of goal, using the same kind of literary model, so that it's actually a movement, or whether actually all you've got is you've just got people on our side writing fiction, and it's not so much it's not really an identifiable movement. I mean, yes, you can draw them together because you can say, well, all these different people share the same kind of politics and they're all on Twitter and, blah, blah, blah. But nevertheless, that doesn't constitute a movement. That's not That's not like a movement in the way that, say, romanticism is or was in
Yeah.
late 18th century poetry or whatever.
Oh yeah, no.
No, that's long been my distinction, that, and I mentioned this on an earlier pod too, that to the extent that we are to the extent that we want to produce good art, we should be a kind of uh, right-wing artists producing art,
Yes.
rather than artists producing right-wing art.
Absolutely.
And the teleological goal should not be ideological.
Yeah.
The goal should just be to express yourself. And so what we need to do is we need to encourage people in our sphere who now are kind of like, they see like the professional publishing world and they're like, well, they're never going to publish me. I'm not writing about, gay Mexican grandmothers. And, so I might as well give up.
Yeah.
And so I think the best thing we can do is encourage them to
self-publish.
keep writing.
Yeah.
Self-publish, keep writing, and do, because there are people who are reading.
I mean,
I'll read it. I'll read what you're writing.
Yeah. I mean, listen, like I've sold 6,000+ copies of my books on Amazon, right? I mean,
Nice.
And that's not including the ex-Benedict option, or any of the Antelope Hill stuff. I came out of nowhere. I just started writing, and that's if that's one thing that you take away from sort of my example, is you can do it. You can just, if you want to write, if you feel a vocation, then just do it. Don't think about whether or not you're going to get your work published by, a literary journal, or whether you're going to have your first short story collection or novel published by Penguin. Just get it out there, and because you have the tools. It's easy to publish a book on Amazon. I know maybe it's less than ideal to be giving a percentage of profits to Jeff Bezos, but unfortunately you will be giving a percentage of profits to anybody, whoever you go with.
Absolutely.
And they will have a lot more money and a lot more power than you. So there's no getting away from the fact that you are in bed with the enemy, whether you like it or not. So I just think, yes, just start publishing stuff. Just start writing. I mean, you can, if you're worried about writing under your own name, or you're just experimenting, then create a persona. I created a persona, and it's worked very well for me. I mean, the persona is me, but it is nonetheless a persona, and I mean,
and it's freeing, right?
Yeah,
it's liberating.
Yeah, but that's the thing that everybody. That's one of the great services that Bronze Age Pervert did, I think, and that's I don't know that I would have started down this path. Well, I know I wouldn't have started down this path without him, and without seeing what he had done himself, and the success that he had, and the ability that he had to influence people and events. And so it's actually a time of great promise. I mean, it's a difficult time, sure, and it's more difficult than ever to get into traditional publishing. I think it's more difficult than ever probably to get a publishing contract with a big publishing house and sell lots of books. I mean, a vanishingly small number of people manage to do that, and even people who get contracts with Penguin and people like that don't usually end up selling a lot of books. So there's got to be, we can create an alternative. We are creating an alternative, and I think it just needs more people to have the courage to put their work out there. And that's one of the nice things about the magazine, is that I can host not just people who are writing essays. I mean, that's great, and I love that. But the fiction, I think, is that the artistic stuff it's fantastic. And to speak again to the Black Pill essay, then there's been a huge variety of fiction in Man's World.
I would like to take this opportunity to give a shout out to PCM Christ, who's a friend. He blurbed Nutcranker, Detective Wolfman.
Yep.
They're both in the most recent digest. Great guys, and great stories. And I mean, a lot of the best fiction is being written outside of the mainstream. And not only is it not like, oh, well, it's a choice, and if you, don't think it could survive in the mainstream, you should, write, and self-publish. Like I think actually if you are a true artist, you have to self-publish, or you have to publish with Matt Forney. Those are your options, because otherwise your story will be cut to shreds. Like it'll be, censored so much that it'll no longer be what you intended it to be. And then it's like, what's the point? Well, why did you even write it if it's not what it's? And I will say, Nutcracker, Matt, like, he didn't change a single word. He maybe made some grammatical corrections, but that's about it. Like this was a very offensive novel. So I mean, kudos to Matt, and kudos to everyone in our scene for writing and saying what they really mean. Because like a lot of the fiction that you pick up that's published by Simon and Schuster or Penguin has people don't realize this, but it's been through legal, it's been through sensitivity readers. This has been like a workshopped kind of focused grouped novel that is like meant to convey a certain message, and all the edges have been sanded down.
It's a product of a bureaucratic structure. That's what it is.
Yes.
And nothing good comes out of bureaucracy. Nothing good comes out of bureaucracy.
True.
I mean, I made the mistake. Well, I say made the mistake. I decided to read a book by Sally Rooney. I don't know if you're familiar with Sally Rooney.
Oh, I'm familiar.
Yeah. Normal people. Her book, because it was dramatized in this country last year, in 2020 it was dramatized. So it was on during the pandemic, and since life ground to a halt, then I ended up watching the dramatization, and I thought, well, I'll read the. I mean, I obviously knew then what the book was about, but I decided to read the book, and honestly, it's amazing that is a book that has sold millions of copies and is hugely successful. I'm like, this is the most boring story, about two young people who meet each other, have a kind of abortive sexual relationship, and are just really unpleasant to each other. You're like, oh, great. I mean, great. This really is normal people. I mean, why has this been turned into a novel? I mean, it's just like two ordinary, not particularly interesting people being unpleasant to each other. And so yeah, I mean, I don't think the literary establishment is capable really of producing anything that's worth reading, or taking any great amount of notice of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think crucially, like when you say they're being unpleasant to each other, I bet it's not in interesting ways. I mean, the problem with mainstream literature is it's cucked, and so you can't say anything that's outside of the Overton window, and that's really where most of the interesting stuff is.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, you can have a novel about two people having a relationship, and frankly, maybe this is a lot of relationships these days. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not, a normie. I say what I mean. But, maybe people do have relationships where they don't say what they mean, and they, kind of toe to ideological lines and try not to ever say something that's offensive. But that's not fun. No. That's not fun to read. Well, it's kind of like reading a hostage tape.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably one of the, I don't like to be prescriptive about literature, particularly, but I do think that one of the things that writers on the right have to do is they have to show us not just how the world is, but how it could be. That's one of the things that I found very depressing about normal people was just that it was just kind of glorifying just how mundane and how sort of inescapable that kind of messed up relationship is between people. It's like there's no suggestion that there's any other way for young people to interact with each other. There's no sort of sense of redemption or anything. It's just, oh, people are fucked up, and then they're not very nice to each other. I mean, okay, maybe that's a premise for a novel, but it doesn't doesn't offer any hope. I mean, I return to William Faulkner's Nobel Prize address. I don't know, have you heard it or read it?
I have not actually.
Me
No,
neither.
It's
I mean I've read some Faulkner, but not this
yeah,
address.
it's great. It's great. So it's from, I think it's 1953 was when he won the Nobel Prize. So he was in the process of writing his kind of Jesus parable novel, A Fable, and which is a kind of strange blend of, you know, Faulkner's very high modernism
Yeah,
with the biblical, you know, the biblical story of Jesus's life and sacrifice.
interesting.
But set during World War One, set on the Western Front in World War One, and the Jesus
Mm.
figure is a soldier on the Western Front who leads a mutiny, basically. Against,
Mm.
there's a, you know, they're going to have a big offensive, and then the offensive can't happen because there's a mutiny. And but anyway, but he was writing that at the time. But no, the Nobel Prize address, then Faulkner talks about the deficiencies of modern literature. I mean, you should look it up later, because
Oh, we will.
he talks
Yeah,
about the deficiencies
definitely.
of modern literature, and he talks about the fact that actually what writers write about today, even then in the 50s, had no meaning and didn't matter at all, basically. And he says that writers need to return to the ancient verities, the old eternal truths, and until they do this, then they will write not of the heart but of the glands. You know, so he's just talking about the people in the characters in novels are fighting meaningless battles and winning meaningless victories. It's all this. I mean, it's
Yeah.
incredible. It's wonderful rhetoric, and it's actually rhetoric that he then uses in A Fable that actually then features in the novel. There's a speech by one of the characters, a general, which actually is an expansion on the theme of the Nobel Prize speech. But it's just very striking, you know, that kind of problem was diagnosed 70 years ago, and it's only really got worse, I think.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I think I would settle for a novel of the glands.
Yeah.
At at least that would be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, the problem with
Mhm.
the work these days is, I mean, it's like it's literally censored. So, I mean,
Yes.
the self-censorship has been inculcated within the writer,
Yeah.
but beyond that, it's sanded down on the edges, like, oh, this character
Yeah.
is too much of a token this or token that, and you need to. So, I mean, it's just like,
Well, that's something that Faulkner probably wouldn't have had to contend with in the
thankfully.
1950s. So that's a new development that slightly yes changes the alters the problem somewhat. But it's definitely
But good for us.
Yeah.
Like we have free reign. I mean, we're the only people who actually are free to write what we want to write.
Yeah.
And are like, I mean, it is rare to find someone who has a free mind these days, who isn't, kind of corrupted by the regime and can think for themselves. And to find an artist, because art is so progressive. I mean, to find an artist who actually is able to think for himself, well, that is an artist that is, in some respects right wing, or if not right wing, has embraced something that is against the prevailing progressive ideology.
Part of the faction of truth, as our friend Bap would say,
exactly,
is absolutely part of this. Yeah.
Well, that's I was going to say that's something that's very striking about Fen de Villiers. You know, I mean,
yes.
When was the last time you saw a physical artist who was on the right, who was producing material that is obviously producing sculpture of all things that isn't a hideous instantiation of all of the worst values of leftism? And here you've got somebody who's producing vital structures that absolutely grab you by the throat, and Yeah, that's it's just so refreshing. It's unbelievable. I couldn't when I first came across him, and I can't actually remember how I came across him now, but I did. I thought, my God, this is something different, and that's the that's what we have now. We have the potential to make people say that, and
Yes,
nobody in the mainstream, nobody on the left has the ability to make anybody who's truly honest actually say that. Oh, we've not seen this before. This is refreshing. This is new. This speaks to me in a way that all that other crap doesn't. I mean, no Sally Rooney novel is going to do that. No.
absolutely. I mean, they've created a system where they're constitutionally incapable of producing art. So as a result, you have artists coming to the right just so they have room to breathe
Yeah.
and do art. So like at this reading last week, this Terror House Press reading in New York, I doubt people in the room somewhere, I suppose, right wing or based or
Yeah.
whatever. But I think a lot of people were just, young, attractive women and what have you are there just because that's, where the
Yeah.
artists are.
Yeah.
And like that's where the real like art is happening.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're not lucky in many respects. There's many reasons why men today are not lucky, not the children that history smiles upon. But we do have lay claim to art, and that's not nothing. That's something.
Yeah, precisely, and that's why I say, to go back to that Black Pill essay, that maybe actually what we need to do is we just need to produce art. If we can produce art, I mean really produce art, not we don't actually necessarily really need to worry about the ideology, because there isn't any
Yeah.
real art being produced. Not really. There's not really any honest art being produced, or there's not much of it. So that's what we need to do. That's
Definitely.
and then people can label it dissident right all they want, but that wasn't the starting point. That wasn't the aim. The aim was just to produce good art because no one else is.
Absolutely.
I very much had this thought, and again, I want to be careful what I say here, but I very much had this thought, kind of after the midterms, it's like kind of starts to feel like in the United States here, like, just demographically in terms of the numbers, statewide elections, you know, is there really a political solution anymore? But instead of getting depressed about that, I just thought about what it is that I do, what we do on this podcast, what a lot of people that I'm friends with online do, and it's like the art. You can put the art first, and that has a huge effect. I mean, if you can get, and there is a political dimension to that as well. The art should be for art, but in as far as there is a political dimension, I think that's the most we can do politically because art changes culture, politics is downstream of culture, as Andrew Breitbart always said. So
Yeah.
it's I don't think it's a cope, but it's a way of sort of dealing with some of these more top these matters of day-to-day politics seem a little bit outside of our control. Art is always by definition within our control.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a very 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 good point, Matt. I think that's definitely food for thought. And I certainly think that obsessing about the politics of art before you actually get to the business of making art is pretty stupid as far as I can see. Like trying to define a program for the dissident right to produce art, I think is. I mean, obviously, we can think about the kind of things that we want to do, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that, but obsessing over getting precisely the right program together, and it has to have these qualities to be dissident right, and yeah, I think that's
Right.
That's frustrating, but I think that there are a lot of people who want to do that because there are a lot of on the right as on the left, there are a lot of kind of pure theory cells who just
Right. And it's very antithetical to what art is.
Yeah.
Art is the opposite of theory in so many ways. Like art can be informed by theory can be informed by art, but it's like a left brain, right brain thing. You can't, I'm not to sound like your average like high school art teacher or whatever with purple hair, but art is messy. Art
Sure.
It's a messy process.
Yeah.
And which maybe that's one of the reasons why sometimes it's not as associated with sort of more conservative or right-wing politics, because I think you could delve into that. That doesn't necessarily mean that the two things are mutually exclusive by any means, but you have to almost kind of withhold that desire to impose order initially. Obviously, later on, art can be very Apollonian, but the initial inspiration is a messy process where you kind of just have to let the spirit take you.
Yeah. No, and to underscore the extent to which right-wing art, the extent to which we want our art to be art first and politics second. I'm struck by recently a friend of ours, J.L. Mackey, who is a writer in his own right on our sphere. He said people should be reading the novels of my friends, The Neighbor by Caleb Caudell, Automaton by T.R. Hudson, Nutcracker by Dan Baltic, and House of Sleep by Brad Kelly. And these are all novels, like I think in some respects, we're all kind of in the same political place, more or less. But these are all novels that are very different and very different stylistically, very different, in terms of, even thematically. So, I think there is a good deal of diversity in good diversity in styles and methodology in writing, in fiction, and in art, in our sphere, and that's as it should be. It should not be. We should not all be. I mean, I love zero HP stories. Not everyone should be trying to write zero HP stories.
Yeah,
people should be writing, the stories they are supposed to write, the stories that they feel comfortable writing, and that's how we make good art.
Those 4 books you said, I guess J.L. Mackey had said it. I mean, it's again, I'm not even trying to drag this guy. I haven't read the Perez article, to be honest, so I can't even I'm not trying to make a definitive pronouncement here, but I'm guessing he hasn't read any of those 4 or 5 novels you just mentioned, because all of them, despite coming from this scene, none of them are Black Pill novels, and none of them really resemble Zero HP or Delicious Tacos, or much less Bronze Age Mindset very much. That it's a great example of all of those books. I think are great examples of people just writing, the novels they had within them, not putting politics first, and putting them out there for very different products. And I think, with some real literary heft to them in every case.
Absolutely. I'm not just saying that because I'm on the list. Well, on that note, I mean, I maybe we pack it in here, because that exhausts my kind of talking points for the interview. But I mean, I'm happy to stay on if you have some additional points. Right.
No, I'm cool with that. If there isn't anything else you want to talk about right now, then we can defer the conversation to another date and have some more fun.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking to you both. Always a pleasure.
Likewise.
Oh, thank you for coming on. We have a lot of fun with you, and God, you are doing the work, as they say.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ryan.
Later, guys.
Speak soon.
Later. Bye.